Good afternoon and Happy New Year to you all. Welcome to our first webinar of the year. Our weekly webinars are aimed to provide and share knowledge on key business topics and specialist areas. Our host today is Steve Parker, a BizSmart advisor and owner of ICD International Development. Before I hand you over to Steve, can I ask you all to post any questions that you may have using the question mark function on your screen, and I'm sure Steve will do his best to answer them all at the end of the session. Okay, Steve, thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Caroline. Good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to be filling in at short notice for a colleague who I understand is ill, Mike Gardner. Hope you get better soon. So if this isn't as fluid and as smooth and it doesn't contain all those wonderful BizSmart graphics that you normally see on a BizSmart webinar, then perhaps you'll understand. It seemed at the time I responded and said yes to be a fairly good idea to use as a webinar some of the preparations I'm doing for an overseas trip next week, not least because I can do two things at once. So thanks for letting me do that. Hence the title, Routes to New Market and Building Long-Term Relationships. The aim of my work with BizSmart has always been to help people in the UK, but to the basis of that being some of the things I've learned or continue to learn when I do business overseas in some of the toughest markets in the world, and I'm going to one of those next week. I thought we'd try and concentrate a little bit with my usual sales and marketing hat on and opening your mind and your thoughts as to potentially new ways of getting into markets and new routes to market. And then particularly at the start of the year when we've spent time with friends and people that we've either liked or we haven't liked, but the people element theme, to think about the people element of business, which is absolutely critical in some of the markets that I work with, because they don't rely on credit ratings and an IT version of people, if you like. So we're going to kick around with any luck over the next few minutes some thoughts on how you develop great long-term relationships, how you develop relationships with people who inadvertently become your own sales and marketing people, whether that's formal or otherwise, and how you establish repeat business over a period of time, and then you can use that in your UK market just as I do in my own work as well. You've seen my background before. I'm fortunate enough to be working with 30 or 40 of you in Worcestershire, trying to help you gain more sales, more marketing, more profits, and to achieve the goals and the big, hairy, audacious ones that we include in BizSmart strategy sessions, of which many of those are still continuing. So before we get into it, I'm going to try and simplify some of it without insulting any of your intelligence by explaining what's meant by what I call the 4 T's, explain how you can apply that to your business, and then we'll also look at some routes to market and see how the different types of relationship which you might choose to develop can then be applied, and how I'm going to apply them, hopefully successfully, when I'm away in the next couple of weeks. If you're watching this on catch-up, we'll insert the word that I've successfully used during the recent trip, because they're tried and tested methods where sometimes they can be a little bit frustrating because lots of them take a little bit of time to really get underway, but then you know that about developing relationships with people anyway. So background to me, the link on the background part of it is that the reason I'm the UK partner for a couple of golf organisations, and I work with people in the Far East and the Middle East and help them do business, and I actually work with somebody senior in the Seychelles who chooses to just use a bloke from Stourbridge for some of his business development is not because I was the brightest kid at school, but fundamentally they enjoy the relationship, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship. And I guess that's what gets me the repeat business. So a fundamental thought before I go on an overseas trip, apart from all of the strictly business criteria that you think about before you go, is what's the most important thing you want to achieve, and in its very, very, very simplest form, I want to make the right impression. I realise that I'll be going into meetings with people who might have seen 8 or 10 people that day. They might be seeing another 8 or 10 the following day. And it's a better return on my investment and my client's investment if I can find a way of, after I've left, them remembering me. I want them to remember me and my client and the things that we've talked about after I've got back on the plane, so that I'm not just relying on a 10-minute, 20-minute, 2 hours, 5-hour conversation on that particular day. I somehow want to get inside their head in a comfortable way where they decide to do it. Now, it's a pretty blooming big challenge in the most competitive markets in the world. So let's think about the relationship bit. And when we do strategy sessions, one of the aspects which should be the easiest part of the strategy sessions, but from my experience many people find the hardest, is the bit where we spend quite a bit of time on core values and core purposes, so that we're cutting it back so that you actually take time to think about yourselves and what your business is really, really trying to achieve. Now, BizSmart have included that in the strategy sessions for all sorts of reasons. Relevant to this one is the thought that if we didn't do that, or if you don't do that, or if you haven't come up with an honest answer to what your core values are, then if you don't know yourself, then how do you expect somebody else to? And how do you know what type of relationship actually works and is going to be good for your business? So part of the thing that I've already established for my meetings, for my companies, for the clients that I'm representing, is what they want it to stand for and what type of relationships they want. So as part of the business development, know yourself first, and then consider what types of business relationship you want, what levels of commitment you're prepared to give, and is that determined by the amount of business you're likely to get, the potential, or just because you want to establish higher and lower levels of commitment? How close you want to get to some people? Do you want to be everybody's best friend? Do you want to be best friends with some of them? And consider the amount of time investment that you're going to put into the relationship, irrespective of the financial return you're going to get out of it. And it's not something we always think about, but it should be something that you, as owners, directors, people who employ people, people who choose the kind of personality that they're going to employ, that you have a fairly clear idea about. And in a while, we're going to show how that will actually convert into bottom line business and how that will have an impact, rather than just identifying a prospect, identifying somebody you might want to sell to, and then you give them the features and the benefits and the sales spiel. This is real personal, what you stand for stuff, because there are more variations in people than there are in product, and maybe your own personality and the personality of your company might be one of your best selling points. It can be a bit tricky, it can be a bit difficult to cope with, but the more you do it, the more you can be comfortable with. So we have other people in the BizSmart program. If you want to get way more scientific than I'm than I'm about to, because I'm just a simple bloke from Stourbridge going to tell you how it works in some parts of the world. I'm not getting in here to personality profiling and all of that, but we have good BizSmart people who can help you in a far more scientific way. This is a Black Country West Midlands version, that's used worldwide, where in some places I'm known as Mr. Stephen Parker, managing director of 3 companies, and it's equally as big a thrill when I'm just known as Steve from Stourbridge, because they've remembered me and they happen to like dealing with me and they like what we're trying to do. So we'll look at how people do it. Why do we need to do this? Well, that's one of the few vaguely glamorous pictures you're ever going to see, and sometimes of the year and in previous years you might have thought, fantastic, that bloke on the end of the webinar is going to those glamorous places, and then you look at the news recently and you might be thinking, blimey, I'm glad I'm not going there. I really don't mind. The Middle East and the Gulf region and places like that are a good example to use in terms of relationships, because they don't use financial data to decide whether they're going to work with you or not. Although they're progressing, they're very modernized in some of the places. They're very, very, very sophisticated. If you imagine that the business was always done from a tribal and an extended tribal, and this isn't insulting anybody at all because I know enough of them. If you imagine that the way they choose to do business, since time immemorial in their cases, they did business with people that they wanted to do business with, that they could treat almost as family, and they were very, very skeptical about letting people into that world, into their world that they didn't trust. They'd been misused and abused for generations, and people still try to, and it's where they make the mistake. So simply put, one way of doing business in any part of the world is to, I'm not going to discourage you from checking out financial data if that's what you want to do, but if you pretended that wasn't available and you concentrated on the business relationship, then you'll always do better, because irrespective of somebody's financial status, how much money they have or haven't got, people tend to pay people they like, and they tend to do business with people they like. And if I'm allowed to use a possibly less than professional business expression, they crap less on people that they really like. Why would you want to upset a good relationship for the sake of not treating them properly? And imagine all of the hassle with that, where I've got good relationships. There are ways on international, but that's a separate webinar on securing payment without finding out people's financial status. But the idea of this is that you're doing business with people who you want to do business with, who you like and trust, and who want to do business with you. A simple way of developing that, and the way you would probably have to work if you want to get repeat business from certain parts of the world, and arguably in the UK as well, I've simplified it. It's the 4 T's method: touch, test, tender, and trust. And it's a simple way of doing it. And you have some choices on it. People in some of the parts of the world, or in my case, anybody I deal with, I use the 4 T's. The first one is touch, without being too embarrassing. It's far easier if you touch the person and the product or the service. You look them in the eye, you're face to face, you hold the product, you think about it, you get inside it, and you do. So most people in that part of the world, and for me in the UK, any of you that I'm working with, I could have, for example, just have taken the BizSmart Smart Checker that you completed, had a look at it, decided that I really liked you and your company, and we could have gone straight on to a next stage. I always meet the people I'm working with, and don't always, that's just part of an investment I make. The test bit is the obvious one, where you either deliberately or accidentally test the person and the product. So you've sat in front of them, you've spoken to them, you kind of like what they're doing, you're possibly excited by what they're trying to do. You can see the features and the benefits. They've done a pitch, if you like, or maybe they haven't done a pitch at all. And then they're going to test you. They're going to test you because they'll contact you at a time of day, or need something desperately, urgently, or they'll want to place a small order to see if you really, really are interested in them. They might ask you for a slight variation on an existing product range to see whether all of those things, when you went over and it appeared that you want to develop a good long-term relationship with them, and it appeared that you were really, really interested in their stuff and in them and in their company, and you weren't just in it for themselves, they'll test you out with a small. And you have to reply. And if they tell you they want it urgently, you have to ignore the financial man who says, blimey, that costs a lot to send by courier. Let's send it by the slow boat to China and let's see if that works. It's part of the test, and just be aware that that's what's happening in the early stages of any relationship, because if it was you, you'd do the same, and that's how you do it. And then the tender bit comes, that when you've gone through that process, you get a chance to tender for the bigger stuff, the bit you're excited about, the bit that they're excited about, the bit that's going to give you a return on your investment. And when you've been through a few of those projects together, it develops trust. And that's the most valuable commodity, irrespective of your sales figures, irrespective of your product. The ones that you want to work with, that develops long-term profitable relationships, and ultimately turns to your bottom line. So remember the 4 T's when you're approaching people, when you're doing it, and remember the bit before about how are we going to approach it and how you're going to do it. So 4 T's, it's very, very easy for me to remember, because one of my best business contacts happens to be based in the Gulf. He's one of the people I look up to, or I've learned a lot for. He's arguably the best salesperson I've ever met. It's memorable because, as I've told one or two of you before, he stutters on the letter T. He sells terrazzo tiles, and he doesn't use that as an excuse. And he came up with overcoming his disability, the 4 T's, even though it took him 10 minutes to actually say the 4 T's. It's part of the fun you have of overseas relationships. So I'm going to flick between these two, the next 2 slides, backwards and forwards, without trying to annoy you too much, because those are slides in terms of new routes to market before. We're always coming up with new routes to market. We're always coming up with new ways of selling your product and service. We're doing that because we're constantly trying to seek an advantage. We're constantly trying to position the people, product where we want to sell it to. And we're constantly realizing that in this day and age, people are buying your product in a different way. You don't buy your groceries now in the same way as you did it before. We have access to online stuff. So, but routes to some of the markets are very much what we came up with before. We've done separate webinars on these, and we'll touch it. So let's use a couple of the examples, and focusing on the relationship element, to try and illustrate what I've just been saying about relationships. I've got 2 which I'll run through briefly during the rest of it. I'll keep the clients anonymous, but to illustrate where we're trying to do it. One of the ones in the next fortnight, and my own glass company, which I am prepared to mention, Starbridge Glass International, on the back of it. I had a choice. How much can I handle? What sort of relationships did I want? How close did I want people to get? How much people, time and investment could I afford to put into it? Where did I want to position my product? So and what do I want out of the relationship? So if that was my glass company, instead of trendy bathrooms, customers, I want people to buy my glass. If I wanted to compete in a market where I wanted to make lots of vases, for example, and make how am I going to compete? I've got people in China making it. I've got people making it in India. I've got people making glass vases in pretty much every country in the world, and I've got to try and make them in Stourbridge. And do I want to, with all that relationship investment, do I want 100 people sending me inquiries for 100 vases? Now, if you look at it financially, that can sound quite exciting, but how am I going to manage it? All of those people want me to get to know them. They want to test me. They want to touch the product. They want samples. They want me to respond really quickly. How am I going to do it? How am I going to manage it? How many people could I see on a trip? And if I start from the basis of realizing I've got to get the relationship right, I can't afford to upset them. Because at the time I sat in front of them, having flown over there, and they allowed me to go and see them, I made that impression, I put all that effort into it, and the first time they test me out, I don't respond to the inquiry. I don't think it's valuable. I'm messing the relationship up from the start. I'm never going to get to the tender stage, the big, juicy, meaty stuff. So the relationship aspect is what can you manage? So my route to the market for my glass company and one or two of the others is, and we've touched on this in strategy days, what's your definition of success? And if perhaps even to your bottom line, a definition of success is, if I could get 3 or 4 projects a year, which were 5-figure or 6-figure sums, giving me a turnover of £500,000 or £1 million or more, and I can get that through 3 or 4 key partners of it, isn't that a great definition of success? Can I manage the manufacturing? Can I manufacture the design? And isn't it better for me to invest in the relationships with some of those key partners and manage it than handling it? If I wanted the other route, my route would possibly be loads of widespread marketing, a less close relationship, and I could then employ somebody to handle hundreds of inquiries, of which I might make 10p a vase. It's not what I'm choosing to do for that one. And for one of my other clients, who I'm doing lots of work for in the next fortnight, it wouldn't fit with them either. We'd think we were really busy. We'd think we were getting lots of inquiries, and the percentage return that we were likely to get, at which we could make anything reasonable, would be low. But where we can position it is at the very top end. So the plan for 2 or 3 of those is, if I can get come up with designs, and I can come up with pieces, and I can offer variations on a high quality product range, I can get them to think what if and what can I, through a smaller number of routes to market, then I do it. But the relationship is absolutely key. So I've identified my customers. I want 5-star hotels and above. I want prestigious commercial buildings. I can identify them. Interior designers, let's get a good interior designer. If you look at one of the places on the map that we looked for before, you can go in a directory and you can find that as of yesterday there were 995 interior designers. I can't remember 995 interior designers. I want to identify the top few. Imagine the top few got there for a reason. They got there because they got the most prestigious projects. They'd been through the touch test tender process with Jumeirah Group, with leading hotel groups. They were bold enough and brave enough to stand up to very, very demanding clients. So the route that we're doing for some of that is, if I can invest a whole load of time in developing the right relationship with 4 or 5 interior designers, selling and marketing properly, creating pieces and variations that nobody else can do, it's going to be positioned at the high end. And I can afford to invest that and see them often, Skype them, talk to them, respond fast, respond at a high quality, present things properly, and spend longer with them, because I'm not dashing around seeing 100 people. I might be able to spend 2 or 3 hours with them, and we'll work on projects, and we'll come up with a thing, and there'll be a lot in it for them because we've got our selling and marketing points right. And that's a route through it. And I know that they probably do want to speak to me, but if I then introduce somebody who I'm working with and take them over, and yes, they touch that person and the product, and they realise that they're a friend of mine and I wouldn't let them crap on them, then that works. So I'm finding all those end user customers, I'm positioning it at the very high end. The clients themselves know that if those people then introduce some glass designs or bathroom fitting designs, they trust those interior designers. And then what is absolutely critical for me to actually convert that into real business, really making stuff, really getting paid for it, is that goes out to tender. It's specified. We do our best to it. The contractors then want it at a lower price. They want to substitute some designs, and I need a really strong interior designer to say, nope, that wasn't what we've ordered. Nope, that didn't come from Steve from Stourbridge. That's the only way you're going to do it. We told you it should cost a few £1,000s for that chandelier. That's the only one we're prepared to accept it. And by investing in the relationship, like we said before, long after I've got back on the plane, every time they get something that they need to be particularly great, particularly prestigious, made to very exacting standards, supported by ridiculously high service levels, being able to call somebody on a Sunday or whenever it happens to be, sometimes not being able to get hold of somebody because he said he's on his holidays and flipping heck, he deserves it. It's a relationship. And then every time they get it, so I've got on the plane, but I'm in their head. They're selling it actively, effectively, professionally on a daily basis. I've solved the problem. I'm giving them some value. So that's how we do it. Another one is some children's furniture. I'm finding all of those end user customers. I want lots of customers. I've identified my demographic. I want lots of customers. How do I do it? I do it by developing good relationships with some identified retail stores, and I want an online option. An online option, I've discovered that the people who run the online stores are only interested in turnover and the bottom line. They want fast service. They don't desperately buy into the product. We've just agreed what they can sell it for. I only need to see them a couple of times a year. They're quite happy to deal with an export administrator or any colleague who responds to it. I can afford to get higher numbers of inquiries, but I need to invest in the relationship with the people on the end of the phone, on the end of the email. They still need to touch and test and tender before they'll put it into their product range. And then I'm investing in the relationship, because in one of the largest online stores that I work with in the Gulf, fundamentally I want them to remember me, and my challenge for them remembering me is that one of them has 9,000 products in their range. Now you go from a euphoria of thinking, fantastic, I've got my clients and my product in the best online retail outlets in the Gulf. And yes, I've run around the room and jigged up and down a few times when I first got into that. And then the reality sets in that how the blooming heck do I compete with 9,000 other products? And how do I make them push it? And how do I make them promote it on a daily basis? And how do I make it fit on the front of their page? Now you can spend lots of money doing that, or you can work on the relationship where every time with the people who are on the end of the phone or putting together the pages, and you keep supplying them with content where every time they even think about anything related to imaginative play, furniture, reading, anything like that, all of the selling points which you've told them about, because they like you, because they know that they see you a few times, because you ring them up, because you understand them, because you've invested in the people relationship, they miraculously feature that every time they do it. They bring it to the top of the file. They put it on the front page. they flog it. You want them to fight against whether it's the best space, the best position in the store, and you work on the relationship to do it. So different routes to market, touch, test, tender on the relationship. How are you going to do it? If you invest in a relationship, people will remember you. Sometimes you have to contact them without even trying to sell to them. People, relationships. You could be suggesting, hang on, he's been telling me about the Middle East and some methods that work there, but you're absolutely right. Developing good relationships, working with people who you want to succeed and they want you to succeed is every bit as effective in the UK as it ever was. So this is where the thinking time comes up. There are charts on there which you'll get automatically, which we can talk about at any time for the UK market. There are far more routes to market with that than you'd think about. But we're trying to illustrate the fact that some of the routes to market, some of the access to your customers, some of the ways of finding customers aren't always the way that you imagine they are, and you should be constantly thinking about new ways of accessing them and having people who formally or otherwise are promoting actively, effectively, promoting your product, or you're in their head on a daily basis, which is automatically relationship based. Sometimes the best successes I've had overseas have been when, and it still happens, somebody emails you or contacts you and says, oh, I can't remember why I've rung you now. Oh yeah, I do. The fact that they've actually actioned and got in touch with you specifically is my measurement unscientific that the relationship is developing in the right way. You can soon control your bottom line by it, but by considering the type of relationship you want, that's where you do it. Summary, consider all your options for marketing and selling. Anybody who works with me knows that we're always coming up with new ways of selling and marketing. Consider doing it differently. Different methods of sales training, different methods of marketing. You've got a multitude of choice. Make sure the ones you use fit in with the personality or the personality of the people you employ, and they, unsurprisingly, are consistent with your core values and your core purpose. Some basic selling stuff. You're doing the benefits, not the features. The benefits to the client means you're more interested in their relationship. You're not trying to just reel out your selling features and wonder which ones are sticking. The most important line on that is don't jeopardize the relationship just to sell. What I have to get psyched up about over the next couple of weeks is to go to people where sometimes I won't even have the chance to mention my product. And that's the most difficult aspect for clients who come out with me when they occasionally do to do it. That they've spent all that money, they've been on a flight for God knows how many hours, they feel like crap the following day, and we're doing this really important call, and they're all ready to go, and then they don't even get a chance to do it. But sometimes the relationship is more important, because the good ones will come back to you. The ones that aren't going to mess you about will come back to you, and you only want good ones. Expect the challenge to be huge. Opportunities are, and the relationship gives you a greater chance of developing repeat business, because they're not just thinking of your product, they're thinking of the company and the person, and they don't want to do it. You've seen one of the other ones. How do I do it? BizSmart, AEC Online, Starbridge Glass, a load of other people that I work with in the UK and internationally, because they like the relationship in the business that I do and that I portray for my clients. And some of my clients have then taken that relationship on and are selling lots overseas and are selling lots in the UK. And that's actually what we're here for. So that's how it is. So some new routes to market, long-term relationships, selling products and services that don't come back to people that do, used to be the expression. And your thought for the new year is relationships, relationships, relationships. and that will turn into progress, and profits.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Steve, for hosting today's session. We've got some questions coming through for you. The first one is from Sharon, and she asks, how effective is Skype and FaceTime for relationship building?
Thanks, Sharon. It's one of those new ways of keeping in touch with people and developing it. It's still not as important as the face-to-face. You always need to meet somebody, in my opinion. You always need to spend a little bit of time with it. But you're right, for topping it up, instead of it just being a voice on the phone, or if you go and tell somebody, because the business is growing so well, Mavis is going to be really looking after you. It's a great pictorial one. Skype can be very effective. It gives you a chance to employ your own personality. Sometimes you have to decorate your office. I use it with product placement. I'm working with a few clients, so if I'm doing a Skype call, I just like on TV land, I miraculously put their product behind so it looks as though I'm in their office. And it's a good way of keeping it refreshed. A picture of me has never been a selling point in any of my businesses, but at least it does give a visual. If they're only interested in my appearance, then I'm hardly likely to be working with them for long anyway. But it does overcome some of those. It does overcome some of those barriers, and you should use it whenever you get the chance. Skype seemed to be the next big thing, along with FaceTime, and then people seem to have forgotten about it. And I use it regularly. And the other benefit is you can decide who you want to connect with on Skype. They can decide whether they want to connect with you. If you've upset them, they can disconnect from you. And the other thing of a benefit to all of us is it's free. So it's reduced my Middle East, Far East, Australasia phone bill tremendously, and it's quite useful.
Okay, great. Sharon also asks, are Skype and others, etc., available worldwide?
The answer is yes, they are. The unofficial answer is that in some countries they don't work as well as others. Fundamentally, the reason they don't work in some countries as well as others is that they go through the censorship part of a country. It's how countries, Saudi Arabia might, for example, be one of them, where they want to control what you can and can't see. We take it for granted that we can Google almost anything in this country and find out anything. In overseas countries, that doesn't apply. And the way they control that is by the routing has to go through one or two companies. Now, there are parts of the Gulf where one or two of those companies are realizing that their revenue is suffering because people are using lots of free stuff. So you find the service is variable, and in one country, which I can't quote publicly, what we do is we find that the service is less consistent if it's done as a company to a company. But if the people accidentally do that Skype call from their own residence and you do it from your own residence, and actually we're talking about companies dealing with companies, but realistically a person dealing with a person. So that's entirely allowed. You find that because it goes undetected, you can get a consistent Skype conversation going. So sometimes you just have to work within the way it works, if you like. I'm setting up a number of my meetings in the next couple of weeks by doing Skype calls to people's residences, because we can then show and tell and do it. The relationship, how close do you want to get? It's some of my clients used to have a great relationship with my dog, who used to walk into the side of the Skype. And at first I thought that was a fairly unprofessional, but then I found that it was a way they remembered me. It's just part of the relationship building. If you're happy for them to see what your dog looks like, go for it. Maybe you're the only person that's ever been to see them that talked about their dog. I don't know. It worked for me sometimes, with a subsequent downside in the last 12 months. But so yeah, there we go.
Okay, thank you. And there's another question from Simon. He says, thank you, Steve, for the webinar and the information about the 4 Ts. He says, how many times do you need to meet people in order to make progress?
Blimey. That's a tricky one. Depends how honest you are, how open you are in the first part. 3 or 4, probably. Depends how many overseas people they're dealing with. In my case, some of them, in some instances, let's be fair, somebody's calling you in, they want the price, they want the answer, they want something fairly quick. You still, in my view, have to take some time with your key identified client base, if you like, the ones that you really, really want to work with. You still want to get to see them. You still want to keep in touch. And maybe it's going to take 1, 2, 3 meetings before you really get to that big tender stage. Maybe they don't realise they're doing it, but that's probably what they are. So automatically expect for significant, substantial worthwhile fact, you're going to need to get in your car, get on the plane, find an excuse for seeing them and being comfortable enough when you're seeing them, because they realise you've invested some time and some money in doing it, and the results are worthwhile.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Steve, then, for hosting today's session. I'll be sending out a copy of the presentation and a link to Steve's recent blog. I'd just like to thank you all for joining us, and we hope you can join us again same time next week. Have a good afternoon, everyone.